Good morning. It's Wednesday, January 15th, 2014, and we're in the Commissioners Boardroom, 1115 Commercial Street Northeast in Salem for our weekly Board of Commissioners meeting. And we start our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you'd join us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Well, seems timely. Maybe it should have been done about 3 weeks ago, but our first presentation has to do with the influenza and an update in regards to Marion County. In fact, one of our CCTV people's missing today, sick, and I've heard various coughs and groans for the last few weeks. So we do see what goes on in Portland from the news. There was, in fact, one death in Salem that I'm aware of. So we really kind of want to just know what's going on here and how you're responding to it. So we've asked the Health Department, and Dr. Karen Landers is here to make a presentation and maybe answer some questions and tell me when I'll be able to go without coughing. That's all I want to know.
Well, as I'm sure you're all aware.
Excuse me, would you pull that right up to you, please?
As I'm sure you're all aware, flu season is in high swing in the nation and in Oregon. This information I'm going to be sharing with you this morning is the most recent that we have from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and from our state with regard to the influenza for this season. Let's see. Yeah, so this is a map of the United States, and you can see the brown states. 35 states in the country are reporting widespread influenza activity, including Oregon. That is widespread in the sense of geographic. So across the state, Oregon is reporting influenza. This is a map of the United States showing the level of influenza activity. 20 states currently are reporting high activity. There are 3 levels of high. You can see that Oregon is in the orange, which is in the high level. Influenza this year sort of started in the southeastern part of the country and has worked its way north. So we are on the upswing of influenza, and we are anticipating high activity for the next few weeks. This is information from our Oregon surveillance, and for your information, this really tall line here is the 2009 pandemic. So that was the peak of our activity in 2009, 2010. The red dots that you see here are this year's activity, and you can see that we're just starting to make the climb up to peak influenza activity in Oregon. Again, this is just a table showing that influenza-like illness activity is high and widespread in the sense that it's being reported from all parts of the state. This information comes from volunteer medical providers who in their offices are collecting specimens and forwarding those to the state public health laboratory where they're being analyzed. And you can see what is reportable in Oregon in terms of death are deaths due to influenza under the age of 18 years. So there has been one pediatric death reported in Oregon to date, and that was in Lane County. You may have seen some information about that earlier. This is a breakdown on the types of influenza that we're seeing in the state of Oregon, and this is matched by what we're seeing in the nation. For reasons that are not understood, the H1N1 strain, the strain that was in the 2009 pandemic, is the predominant circulating virus strain this year. And it's circulating at the highest levels that it has circulated at since the pandemic. The bad news about that is that this virus tends to target younger children and younger adults, and they get sicker. But there's a lot of good news. The good news is that this virus hasn't changed significantly since the pandemic, and it is included in this year's vaccine. And the second piece of good news is that the vast majority of these viruses are responsive to the antiviral treatments that we have available. So I am very sure this is information you have seen before, but these are our favorite things to say about influenza. So the number one thing that you can do to prevent the spread of flu is get a flu vaccination. Even though flu has arrived in our community, it is not too late to get vaccinated. And remember, when you get vaccinated yourself, you're not only providing protection for yourself, but you're providing protection for those close to you who may not be able to get a vaccine because of their age, or who may not respond as well to an influenza vaccine because of their age or because of other physical conditions. Wash your hands. We have to really thank Janine Stice. I don't know how many of you saw her column in yesterday's Statesman Journal. She describes very eloquently the appropriate way to wash your hands. We can't say this enough. This is the second most valuable thing that you can do during flu season. Wash your hands, wash them frequently. And just a reminder that washing your hands not only helps prevent the spread of influenza, but also helps prevent the spread of other viruses, other respiratory viruses, and also other unpleasant stomach viruses that we know are circulating around this time of year. The third thing is stay home if you're sick. We would like people not to bring their germs into public venues, such as work or school. That's the way we can spread those germs around. And the last thing is to cover your cough and sneeze. And we like people to either use a tissue or the crook of your arm or inside your jacket or whatever. That prevents those germs from getting on your hands and being spread. Remember that these germs can also be picked up on surfaces that get on your hands. And the last thing I just want to mention in terms of information sharing is where can you get a flu vaccination at this point? We recommend that people talk to their doctor or their medical provider first. We know that some medical providers have used up their flu vaccine supplies this year. A second option is to check the flu vaccine finder. That's available online at flu.gov or at our oregonflu.gov website. It's a little box that you type in your zip code and it will bring up for you places where you can get a flu vaccine. When we did this last week, virtually all of our pharmacies here in Salem came up on the list, and we actually did some calling around, and most of the pharmacies, in fact, do still have flu vaccine. They still have their signs out front saying, get your flu vaccine here, so that's an option for folks if their provider no longer has any flu vaccine. And last, I would say you're always welcome to call Marion County Health Department at this number, and we're happy to share information with you or help direct you to a flu vaccine. And with that, I'll just stop, and I know you might have some specific questions.
I've got a number, but let's see if there's any legitimate ones first.
Oh, I've got. No, go ahead.
First of all, thank
Pull
you.
your microphone too, Commissioner.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Dr. Landers, for being here. These are great reminders. There are a couple of things. In fact, I was just talking to somebody yesterday. So since you're here, a couple of questions. So if you get the flu, how long are you contagious? Or the question someone was talking about yesterday is, are you contagious before you actually come down with the symptoms that you would be saying, oh, I have the flu? And the other question I have is, as you talked about, protecting coughs and all, so how long do germs stay active on surfaces, and should we be walking around wiping doorknobs and countertops and et cetera off? Can you talk a little bit about those?
Okay, so I heard three questions. So I'm writing them down so I don't miss anything. So in fact, you can be contagious before you actually develop symptoms of the flu. And we usually say for a couple of days prior to you actually start developing, say, fever and cough and the symptoms that we typically associate with influenza. And that's because the germ needs time to grow in your nose and throat. So and during that period of time, you can actually spread those germs via touching nose, throat, whatever, to other places. So yes, in fact, you can be contagious. One of the advantages to being vaccinated is that you do not carry the germ in your nose and throat. So that's another advantage in terms of being protected. In terms of how long are you contagious after you catch the flu, we generally say 3 or 4 days after you've, and typically, and this is a guideline for employment situations, what we typically tell people is we don't really want to see them back at work until their fever is down and they no longer need to keep it down using some medications, the typical things that we use to control fever. So usually 24 hours after your fever is gone and you don't need to do anything to keep your fever down, we would say it would be safe for you to return to work. So that's the answer to that question. Germs can live on surfaces for quite a long time, several hours, maybe even a day or more. So the best thing that you can do is just wash your hands frequently. So and then things that are frequently touched, it doesn't hurt to wipe down periodically, especially, I would say, if you're in a home situation and you're caring for someone who has influenza, then it really makes sense to be wiping down things if people are moving around. But things that are frequently touched, communal computers, telephones, if office spaces are being shared, those sorts of things, it doesn't hurt to wipe those down periodically. But I would say the best thing you can do is to wash your hands.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I have a couple questions, 3 questions, I think. Do you want them all at once, or do you want them one by one?
I got my pen out, so
All
I'll
right.
take notes.
So I came down with something on Veterans Day, and I am still coughing from it, and it's January, whatever, it's today the 15th.
Let's just be
Right.
serious.
No, I did not give that to you, but I think my husband gave it to me. So one of my questions, and it wasn't like a typical cold, and I was talking to a guy last night that I was interviewing on the How Are the Children, and he described exactly the same thing I had. So it started with a tickle in the throat, almost immediately went down in the chest, didn't have the normal, didn't start as a head cold and kind of work its way down, fever and chills, and it just lasted. It was really, it kind of knocked you out, and then lasted for the cough, it just continued and continued. I ended up having, but it was later that I had the sinus problems and stuff. So I guess the first question is, so how do you know it's the flu, and how do you know, or is it just a respiratory virus? I went on the web and was looking, and they have little tables about if it's a cold, it's this, if it's a flu, it's that. So I'm not sure if what I had was the flu, because I had a flu shot, so it could have been a different strain of the flu, or it could have been something else. So that's kind of several questions all wrapped in together. And then the second question I have is, I have heard that using hand sanitizer kills bacteria, but it doesn't kill viruses, and I'm wondering if that's true. And when you're talking about wiping things down, bleach, I understand, kills viruses, but what is the best way, because some things only kill bacteria, and then you think you're protected, but you're not.
Okay, so in terms of the illness that you were describing and how you can tell if you have, say, the cold versus the flu type of thing, I would say that people often think of the flu as being a type of cold, and that is really, I think, a myth that sort of circulates out there. The flu is really quite a serious illness. Most young, healthy people, unless it's H1N1, and we know that actually causes more severe illness in young adults and young children, most healthy people will recover from influenza. But influenza is typically higher fever, great amount of fatigue, muscle aches. It's more of a total body type of illness than we typically think of with the usual upper respiratory infection, a cold, those type of things. The other thing that I think folks need to be aware of is that other things do circulate in the community besides influenza. One of the things that can cause a very prolonged cough, and something that we have struggled with keeping under control in our community, is pertussis, whooping cough. Oftentimes in adults that won't present the same way that we typically think of whooping cough with the whoop and all of that, but it can be a prolonged cough. So we have on occasion reminded our medical providers in the community to be aware that that also circulates in our community, and to test for that, particularly in people that have a really prolonged, nasty sort of cough. So what I would just say is that there are lots of different things circulating out there. We encourage people to watch for symptoms and to check with their medical provider if needed to be evaluated for those things. The second question was about hand sanitizer. And hand sanitizer, especially alcohol-based hand sanitizers, there are a number of hand sanitizers out there that don't contain alcohol, but alcohol-based sanitizers, at least we have evidence to suggest that it is very useful in situations where you can't access soap and water to remove bacteria. And that's a rubbing process, and it's also the drying effect of the alcohol that works on that. It does tend to work on bacteria. It does work on some viruses. It does not work very well on norovirus. That is the unpleasant stomach virus I was referring to earlier in the presentation. And so soap and water is very important in that circumstance. So it doesn't work against all viruses. I would say for influenza that if you do not have access to sink and water, alcohol-based sanitizer is a good choice to use in the interim until you can actually get to a sink and wash your hands. And the third question had to do with what should be using to wipe down surfaces. Bleach solutions are number one. We know that bleach kills practically everything. And turns things white as well. So bleach solutions and different strengths depending on what types of circumstances you're dealing with. When we're dealing with outbreaks of the norovirus, the stomach flu virus type of situation, we typically recommend specific concentrations of bleach solutions. However, there are many just available sanitizing sort of wipes that you can buy, and on the container it will tell you what sorts of bugs it's good against. I think that most of the available sanitizing wipes that you can buy, that you can just wipe down surfaces with, are good against typical bacteria, and I think most of them are good against flu. So I think that would be a good choice to wipe surfaces down with, and just having a container of those handy would be fine.
So did we take up all your
Well,
questions?
pretty much, but now a couple of versions just on the related subject. Just in my own household, I guess I'd say I've seen kind of three different versions. I have the one that apparently Commissioner Carlson didn't give to me, but that was my own. My wife and daughter were just suddenly hit, and I would think would make the norovirus, throwing up, and it was instantaneous. And then son and his girlfriend looked like true flu. So I guess I'm wondering, am I going to get all three of these coming, or?
Not if you really wash your hands well.
I'm not real good, but I'll start. More specific to the county, Doctor. So kind of I saw the chart, and I think the one was for Marion County showing the spikes compared to 2009. So kind of like what level of concern are you in turn, or is the county more specifically? And is this pretty much normal, and then follow up? So when do you get concerned and treat it as something special?
Right. So I think that I could safely say that what we're seeing right now is what we would expect of a rather typical influenza season. One interesting thing, and I think I can go back. Let's see. Is that you'll notice there are no bee influenzas listed on there at all. So no bee influenza has actually been isolated in the state at all. Most of the influenza that's circulating is the H1N1. And as I already said, it's not really clear why that virus has sort of risen to the top of the pile, because in the past couple of years, it's been the other one, the seasonal H3 virus, that has predominated. Let me see if I can get this one. And you can see there are not very many of those. So for whatever reason, H1N1 has sort of risen up again, and it's circulating at the highest levels that it did since the pandemic.
So the numbers may be high, and we haven't really reached a peak yet. That's
Right.
the other reason I wanted to have you come in this morning, because that's out there yet.
Right. And that's another reason why I would say it's not too late to get your flu vaccine, because we really are just sort of on the upswing, and I think that people have time to get their vaccination and get some protection if they haven't already done that. I would say, when would we get concerned? I think, of course, you know this already from our previous experience with the pandemic, but if we see a new type of influenza in the community, something that no one has been exposed to, obviously that's of great concern. But at this point in time, we have two A influenzas circulating, both of which are included in our available vaccine this year. So that's very good. We also know that the virus is treatable with our antivirals. There are very few of the H1N1 viruses that have been identified that have shown any resistance to the antiviral medications. So we have medications to treat, we have a vaccine that can protect.
The last, I don't know if you can truly answer it, but I think even myself, I'm wondering, so at what point when you have the flu or feel this, would you suggest seeking medical attention is what really the question is?
Right.
Some guidelines perhaps, or whatever comes to mind.
Right. So in most cases, as I've mentioned, people do recover from the flu. It may knock you back for a week or sometimes even longer because of all the body aches and the fever and all of the other symptoms. I would say reasons to seek medical care would be if a person isn't able to maintain their hydration, their fluid levels, if they're not eating and drinking and keeping well hydrated. A second thing would be that we know that a complication of influenza can be pneumonia, either from the influenza itself or from a bacteria. So someone who is, say, on the recovery from their flu, who all of a sudden, again, develops a fever and are having difficulty breathing or coughing more after they have started to get better, that's of concern, and that's something that I would definitely talk to a medical provider about. Obviously, anybody who's having difficulty breathing, whose color doesn't look good, who can't stand up and move about without falling over, those are obviously things that need to be taken care of immediately.
Thank you. There's one question just came in, and I see if well, would you just go ahead, Gloria?
Dr. Landers, can you address the importance of booster shots, especially for young children? Is that necessary with the flu shot?
Right. So children who have not been previously vaccinated, who are under the age of 9 years, are recommended to receive 2 doses of vaccine initially. That sort of, one to sort of prime their system and the second one to sort of get their immunity up to level. So for all children under the age of 9 who have not been previously vaccinated with flu, starting from 6 months, which vaccine is recommended now for everybody starting from 6 months to whenever, we would give those children 2 doses of vaccine spread a month apart. And that's to give them a really good immune response because they won't previously have had any exposure to flu.
Well, any other questions? You've covered it all. I feel better already, I think.
Oh, good.
And I certainly appreciate you coming in this morning and all the good work you do. Thank you. All right. Let's move to our consent calendar.
I think, Mr. Chair, it's my turn, and so I would move that we approve the consent calendar, and included this morning, Board of Commissioners, is to approve an order establishing board, committee, and commission assignments for Marion County elected officials. In the Health Department, approve Amendment Number 7 to receive $634,437 from Oregon Health Authority to provide financial assistance to operate and contract for the operations of community addictions and mental health services through June 30, 2015. In juvenile, approve receipt of $800,000 from the Oregon Health Authority for behavioral rehabilitative services at the Juvenile Department. Under the tax collector, approve an order authorizing a property tax refund in the amount of $19,435.70 to Janice Crouch. Approve an order authorizing a property tax refund in the amount of $17,999.35 to Alex Fruit, LLC.
Second the motion.
All right, it's moved and seconded to approve our consent calendar this morning. Any further discussion? I hear none, so all in favor say aye. 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 The motion passes. Next item is the one action item we have this morning. It's under Public Works, consider approval of a resolution supporting the Salem River Crossing, the Salem Alternative, and the Oversight Team's policy statement. Cindy Schmidt is here with a group, and I'll just let you take over and please introduce people as they come.
I'll need just 1 second here to get to our, out of this presentation and into ours. How do I get out of here?
Well, as you're doing that, I'll just make a comment. This has been a long process, 8 or 9 years, and when I've been on the oversight team and following it through different variations, thought it'd take about a year. But here we are, and finally, I think we're wrapping up this stage of things, and if you're ready, then go ahead.
Okay, very close. So where's my full slideshow on this one? Right there. This one? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, good morning, Chair Brentano, Commissioners. We're here today with a couple folks involved with the Salem River Crossing Project. With me is Julie Warnke, Transportation Planner with the City of Salem, and Dan Fricke, Transportation Planner for the Oregon Department of Transportation. These two folks are project managers for the ongoing river crossing project. And we're here today to ask the board to consider a resolution in support of what is called the Salem Alternative. Excuse me. In the way of background, you've touched on it some. This discussion regarding a third bridge or an additional crossing in the Salem area of the Willamette River has been discussed by community leaders for many, many years. And there's a number of reasons for that. There have been incidences that have shown the need to have alternate access across the river at various times for various kinds of events. There's a need to preserve freight mobility through the Salem area across the river. There's critical emergency services located, the hospital in the Salem area, those kinds of things that we have to maintain direct access to at all times for our traveling public. And then, of course, there's the economic development perspective of continuing to keep traffic moving, and we have a number of capacity issues currently on the two existing bridges, and those need to be resolved. And as we know, this has been a long, long process. It's been going on through a series of technical advisory committees and oversight team meetings over the past 3 to 4 years, I think. And that had resulted in the recommendation of the oversight team in August of 2012 to move ahead with the final selection, which at that time was called 4D. Then, in the process of the agencies bringing back option 4D and really involving the public more, the Salem City Council had recommended some changes to that 4D alternative and developed it as the Salem Alternative. And the primary reasons, as I understand it, for that were that there were just a number of impacts and cost facets to the proposal 4D that just didn't seem appropriate to them, so they recommended some changes. They asked the consultants and the project team to go back and reanalyze those in more detail and bring back some recommendations related to that. And it resulted in the oversight team being presented with the Salem Alternative. And Julie is going to be talking a little bit about the Salem Alternative and the process as we move forward. And at this point, the oversight team will be meeting in early February with the goal to make a final recommendation on the alternative that will be moved ahead with at this point. And they are asking for feedback from each of the individual agencies affected, and that's why we bring this resolution to the board today. And in that resolution, we are proposing that the board support the Salem Alternative as presented, along with some policy statements that the oversight team added, and those are all in your packet this morning with the resolution. So if you don't have any questions on overall process, I'll have Julie go ahead and Julie and Dan go ahead and talk a little bit about this presentation that was prepared by their consultant.
Good morning. So, how do I get this one? Yeah, there we go. Okay. So just to, reiterate what Cindy said, the Salem Alternative was really the Salem City Council's response to the Alternative 4D, which was the full, more of a full build option. And the The Salem Council spent much time on this, many work sessions, multiple public hearings, and ended up last June of 2013, with a unanimous vote in support of the Salem alternative. The City Council would be the first to acknowledge that they are not traffic engineers, and so really what they were trying to provide input on was not a designed solution, but policy statements that they felt were very important to have as the Salem alternative. So when the oversight team met and directed the project team to go back and do some additional analysis, look at it from a traffic engineering perspective, there were a number of small refinements made that we believe are consistent with the Salem alternative, but are slightly different. And so I'll be highlighting some of those changes. I'm going to start from the west side over on Highway 22 and then move up over to the east side at the end. The Highway 22 end, where the ramps merge with Highway 22 from the connection to the bridge, which I'll call Marine Drive, the City Council had suggested that we relocate the interchange from Rosemont further west to Eola. When our consultants looked at that, they found that really wasn't quite such a simple, solution. What the council's input had been was that the alternative 4D, in order to keep that exit at its current location at Rosemont, had required removing all of the businesses along the south side of Edgewater, except for West Salem City Hall, but essentially that was not something that the council was willing to accept. And so we looked at here, this is just the ramp, showing the ramp there to Rosemont and how the new ramps from Marine Drive, shown in blue, come in. And bottom line is they don't provide enough weave area in order to leave the Rosemont exit in its current location. However, we don't know if moving the exit to Eola, we can't presuppose that that's really the solution that needs to happen. You're probably familiar that exit there, it's a half interchange. The other half interchange is down by Capitol Manor. And ODOT has been planning to do a facility plan for this portion of Highway 22 from the bridges going west to Dokes Ferry. That project has been on hold, waiting the outcome of this project. And so we need to look at a bigger picture in order to determine how best to serve that area of West Salem. So in order not to wipe out the businesses there on the south side of Edgewater, we have to look at closing the off-ramp to Rosemont and seeing how that can work with the traffic. So, and it is shown that it can work, although it's not ideal. The other connections here, we have the ramps that come from Highway 22 onto Marine Drive. They come down to grade at Glen Creek with a signalized intersection, and then they continue at grade Marine Drive as essentially a minor arterial, one lane each direction. We also make some widenings at the intersection of Orchard Heights and Wallace Road to accommodate the different turning movements. There will be some local street connections onto Marine Drive. So the traffic performance that is, we looked at the comparison between what happens in no build versus what happens in the full build or alternative 4D, and then compared that to the Salem alternative. You can see that the performance is not as good as alternative 4D, but it is much better than no build in most cases. This is showing the West Salem intersections. The bridgehead in West Salem We'll have a number of additional turn lanes to accommodate the traffic flows. This comes out to Wallace Road at Hope, and then you have the future Marine Drive shown there as well. Performance, once again, shown here on the west side. That intersection doesn't exist today, essentially. That's why there's nothing in no build. This is the, I believe this is both AM and PM. Okay, on the east side, which is, of course, Marion County, the bridge would come into Hickory and Pine Street as a couplet for just a short one-block section. The bridge would come down to grade at Commercial Street and then connect over to Liberty Street. So the eastbound movement would be on Pine Street. The westbound movement would be on Hickory Street. Front Street would need to be realigned closer to the river in order to, and also drop down some in elevation in order to allow the bridge to come to grade by Commercial Street. Here you can see the traffic performance comparison again on the east side. Liberty at Pine is probably the biggest choke point in this part of the project. These, of course, are just the peak hours, and so during the rest of the day, the traffic would be flowing better. We also looked at the traffic performance in downtown Salem, even though we're not actually doing anything there. But by one of the purposes of the study is to relieve the congestion downtown by providing another location, another possible route. And so you can see particularly Marion at Commercial, which is a key bottleneck intersection. And no build, we're showing in the PM having a volume to capacity ratio of over 2. And even with the full build, we were only down to 1.06, Salem alternative at 1.3. In terms of the impacts to the environmental factors, the land use, et cetera, the Salem alternative has about half as much impact as the alternative 4D. So, less than half of the residential displacements as well as business displacements, about half as many tax lots, and about half as much acreage required for this.
I have a question. I'm following along here. On this page here on, for example, displacements, alternative D, 85 to 95 residential units. Salem alternative, is that a minus, or is that just like a hyphen? Or
That's an about, approximately sign, and if you look at the way bottom of the slide in small print, you can see that the results for the Salem alternative are for comparison purposes only and may be modified based on future refinement. So
No, that's fine. What I wanted to make sure I understand is with the Salem alternative, you're looking at 35 to 40 versus 85 to 95.
Correct.
I wasn't sure what that little marker.
correct. Yeah, I guess I see how it could have been viewed easily as a minus sign, but no. In the historic resource area, we had a number of possible impacts from 4D that are no longer going to be impacted. And then the noise impacts are also expected to be about half as much. In terms of the project schedule, Dan, do you want to talk about this?
Sure. Oops, excuse me. Lucky me, I get to talk about process. You can see here, this is a continually updated figure that we've got that kind of shows the relationship of all the various things we need to do once we've settled on the preferred alternative. We're estimating beginning roughly February 6th, if the oversight team gavels down on a recommendation for preferred alternative, it's going to take us roughly 12 to 18 months to finish the final EIS, including all the land use actions that are going to be necessary, and also working on the funding strategy that we need in order to complete the environmental process. So you can see how that all falls together, how a lot of the tasks are overlapped and are interrelated. Getting to the end, the last box, the box that says ROD, or Record of Decision, that's the final action by the Federal Highway Administration to approve the environmental document. So if we go to where we are and where we've been and where we are, and I'm sure Commissioner Brentano fondly remembers all of the things that have happened over just since March of 2012, since this figure has been in place. The circle under that you see from November to January under local agency discussions is where we are now. As we said, in October, the oversight team took the information that we produced on the Salem alternative and asked all of the oversight team representatives to go back to their respective boards and commissions and have discussions and essentially give your representative marching orders on how to represent your jurisdiction at the oversight team. And that's essentially when we met with you in December, and as we're doing today, providing you that information. Once we complete that, talking about next steps over that period, once we settle on the preferred alternative, we begin preparation of the final EIS, which is basically doing a detailed analysis, much like we did for the 8 build alternatives in this thing, update it for the preferred alternative. There are land use actions that need to be taken by the City of Salem and Polk County, and we're having discussions currently on what form those approvals need to take. There is a piece immediately across the river that goes into Polk County and is actually outside the Salem urban growth boundary. So we're talking about, do we need, what kind of land use approval process do we need to embark on to get the approvals that the city and the county need to take. We also have talked about the need to do some kind of a finance strategy. We need to be able to show to the Federal Highway Administration that we at least have established what looks like a workable process or framework to establish funding for phases of the project in order to get the record of decision. If we have a fundable phase, whatever that phase is, it could be as much as just doing preliminary engineering could be considered a fundable phase. We need to be able to show that to Federal Highway in order for them to be satisfied that the project can move ahead, and we can't actually figure out a way to pay for it ultimately, whether it's in phases or all at once. We think very likely we will have to construct it over a number of phases. This table or this chart also has a couple of other things. One of the land use, or not a land use approval, but an approval that has to occur is the Salem-Kaiser Area Transportation Study. The NPO needs to also amend their regional transportation system plan to include the preferred alternative. That requires a unanimous vote of all the members, so that may be the last action that they take. There's also another acronym on here. You may notice CETUS. It's the Comprehensive Environmental Transportation Agreement for Streamlining. Very exciting. It's basically a group of the state and federal regulatory agencies that would oversee this project, and we have a number of milestones we've had to reach with them over the life of the project. The last piece is they get an opportunity to review and comment and then check in on the preferred alternative. That's the last piece. We've been successful all the way through in the other milestones we've had with that group. We don't expect any particular problem in this case. So that very simply is the process we have to undertake once the oversight team makes the recommendation on the preferred alternative. It's not nearly as simple as it sounds, or maybe it should be more simple than it sounds, but it's going to be, not that the last 7 or 8 years haven't been fun, but it should be more interesting now that at least we have a preferred alternative to go ahead with.
So, Dan, you touched a little bit on funding, but you didn't talk at all about any. At this point in time, I have 2 questions. What estimated cost, ballpark? But also, it will involve a variety of funding sources. Could you talk a little bit about what those might be, or at this point, what the group is anticipating, where to look for some funds, and how much from this pot and that, kind of percentages? Just where the discussions are now.
The current estimate for the Salem alternative is $400 million. We had, and I don't remember if all you were involved, but I know Commissioner Brentano was back in, I think it was 2008, we held a funding workshop that we invited a lot of people to.
Excuse me, Dan, could you pull, it's
sorry.
apparently not picking it all up.
Okay. We had a funding workshop in 2008 where we had a lot of discussion about virtually every form, at least from the local standpoint, of ways you could raise money to help support the project. Based on the input from that, the oversight team recommended that we focus on 4 specific types of funding. One would be tolling, local option property tax, or local option vehicle registration fee, local option gas tax, and then property taxes to fund a local share of the project. We need to have additional discussions about that as part of developing the finance strategy. But those are the 4 things we, at least the oversight team directed us initially to focus on, of the ones that made the most sense. We're getting close to the point when we were talking about this, there was the legislature had adopted a moratorium on local option gas taxes and vehicle registration fees, which I believe sunsets this year, or this year or next year.
Soon enough.
Soon enough, yeah. We weren't sure it was going to be soon enough when we started this. I guess it is now. So, and there may be other things. There hasn't been any commitment of state or federal money yet. I think there's at least an assumption there will be a state and federal component of this at some point. We're not sure what that would be. Probably have a better idea once we get a little farther into developing the project.
Okay, good, thank you.
Can we answer any more questions about the resolution or the policy statements or any other slide presentation at this point?
Can I just ask one question? So this was really helpful, thank you. I've heard bits and pieces, but it's nice to have it all put together. And, I was a big fan of 4D, but to be able to see the comparisons of the properties that won't be displaced and the noise and the other things makes it much more understandable. Can you remind me what the cost comparisons were of 4D and the Salem alternative, just ballpark? I mean, do you have an estimate for what the Salem alternative will cost?
The estimate in the draft EIS for 4D, I believe, was $682 million. If you recall, it included that viaduct.
Right, yeah, it was like a
in the
big
air
sweeping
went all
kind
the
of
way
a thing, right, yeah.
From the bridge to 22, and some other structural fixes and realignments of some city streets that the council's asked us to take out.
Mm-hmm. And so the Salem alternative is approximately how much?
$400 million right now is
Right.
the current estimate.
So it saves roughly just under $300 million then.
Doesn't save, it costs less.
Right. Well, if you built the other one, you'd have to have that money.
Yeah. So I have one other question. And yes, this presentation has been really helpful. By September of next year, 2015, you get to the recorded decision, but that's the federal government, if I understood correctly what I heard, so the approval of the environmental. So there's a lot of work, yes, but that seems like a long time out before even a shovel is turned. Can you talk a little bit about when people might actually see work done, and then how long the construction project will be? And again, I understand that this is all very preliminary, but just as an idea.
Just making some, not blind guesses, but some guesses based on similar projects I've seen over the years, and Cindy and Julie may be able to chime in on this as well. Probably we're looking at an 18 to 24 month design schedule would be my guess. Probably another at least 18 to 24 months to acquire all the right-of-way if you were to build it as one phase. I think I've heard from some of our engineering staff, depending on the alternative and how it all comes together, it could be as much as a 2 or 3 season construction job, so it could take as much as 3 years to build the whole thing. Again, if it was built as one phase, obviously if you build it in multiple phases, it would probably take longer than that. So it's a ways out.
It's a ways out. those of us who live in Woodburn understand very, very much
You've been working on that
how
one.
lengthy. Well, see, I've lived there almost 30 years, and it was a discussion before I moved there. So you guys are in great shape. This is a fast project. But no, thank you. I think for our viewers to have just be able to start thinking in terms of all that has to happen, the months and months, the years of just getting through studies and approvals of various documents like environmental impact statements, and then the design, and then right away, and then the actual construction. And I think that's helpful for people to be able to put all that in perspective as this moves forward.
And maybe the good news in this whole thing is this, I think this is, in all the various fits and starts this project has had, in at least the 50 years I can recall, having grown up here. This is as far as we've ever gotten, as close as we've gotten to ever actually identifying a preferred alternative and moving something forward. So I guess we can take that as at least some good news.
We're not quite there yet.
Not quite there yet, but we're
Julie, if I could you discuss for me, you didn't quite get into it, the connections with the parkway and how flows would go coming through that area?
Let me get back to this slide here. So traffic coming off of the parkway and heading to the west would be coming down onto Commercial Street and then turning right at Hickory, and from there immediately going up into the air and onto the bridge. Traffic flowing the other direction, people coming off of the bridge who want to go to the parkway would come down to Pine. They would have to go through the intersection of Commercial at Pine, which would be signalized. They would be on a one-way street, and so when they got to Liberty, they would then turn left. There would not be any cross traffic coming across, although Pine would have right turns out because it would become two-way just on the east side of that intersection. So when we get up to the Liberty at the Parkway there, so traffic going to the Parkway would then have to go through the signal at Hickory and Liberty. It would be a two-phase signal, and we'd look at increasing, eventually increasing the free flow movement from the Liberty onto the Parkway there.
So it's not just a direct connection, but it's pretty much the same flow that you start on the parkway and you can, with a few stops, get on across and head on wherever you're going.
Correct, particularly in the southbound direction. The northbound, I think you have one more signal to go through. But that was a trade-off that our city council thought was important, given that the alternative ramp connections had introduced a lot of overhead structure into the neighborhood and also required the acquisition of quite a lot of business properties in particular, and that was a trade-off they were willing to accept.
Great. All right, any other questions or comments?
So, Mr. Chair, I would move that the board approve this resolution supporting the Salem River Crossing, the Salem Alternative, and the Oversight Team's policy statements.
Okay, I'll second the motion. I just have a quick comment. I can't understand how long this is drawn out to a lot of people who live in Salem. I am much more comfortable with the Salem alternative than I was with the 4D. I thought there were a lot of problems with that one. So I'm pleased that this alternative has addressed a lot of issues that I know were a concern. My support of this is based on what we see at the moment, what's in front of us, the need to move forward, understanding that over these next few years, as there will be a number of decisions along through the process, and understanding that some individual decisions could change from what might be anticipated today. Don't know what those would be, but as in these projects, as you get into more detail, you find out that something's not going to work the way you thought it would. So there might be changes. And so my request and my hope is that there will be a lot of opportunity for public input as more details are worked out, and there may be some other minor options through various pieces of the process and the plan. And so through community input and all of these entities who are involved in this, really be open to public input and making decisions that could, number one, save even more money, and number two, really meet some of the neighborhood needs, because this is going to impact a lot of neighborhoods in big ways. And we know that things change and life moves on, but being sensitive to those neighborhood concerns, I think, is really an important piece of this. So that's it.
All right, I've got a few comments too, and won't take very long. First, I like Commissioner Milne. I agree. I like this plan a lot better than 4D. I'll get into it just a little bit, but I go back to the real eye-opener to me was 8, 9, whatever years ago, and we had a suicide attempt on the bridge, and the whole town shut down. And it was such an eye-opener to me of just how vulnerable we really are, how much we rely on these structures, and the importance of having a backup. Without these bridges, we're looking to cross either at Albany or Newburgh, and that's not acceptable. That would just be utter catastrophe for Salem and Marion County. So that's been kind of my focus as we have gone all through this, is to try to find that other. I was interested in some of my questions I just asked. I wanted the Parkway to just continue out, and that I needed access to Highway 22, worried about cost, safety. Wanted to move traffic out of the downtown, especially truck traffic, and this will have at least the effect of routing that comes from the north away. So I think it's been a long process, and I'm happy to have a part in moving along, but I think it answers those questions, and there's a lot of parts to it, but I'm happy with what's come up and certainly want to support it. I think that's probably enough, but a long process. Again, just glad to be moving along. I think I got it. And that cost part was important. The number I was hearing at one time was 800, and suddenly 400 sounds a lot better. And impacts to the community, those viaducts or whatever, to be, it would have met my criteria of direct shot to 22 with them. But the cost and the imposition on the community and the businesses, this is all better. So, any other comments? And if not, I'll call the question. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes. Thank
Can we
you
read
for
it?
all your involvement, the whole resolution.
Sure.
If you'd like to.
Well, there's a lot of good stuff in it.
All right, why don't you begin then?
Okay, this matter came before the Board of Commissioners at its regularly scheduled public meeting on the 15th day of January 2014 to consider the Marion County Board of Commissioners supports the Salem River Crossing, the Salem Alternative, and the Oversight Team's policy statements. Whereas for many years, community leaders in Marion County, Polk County, and the city of Salem have discussed the need for a third bridge that creates an alternative route across the Willamette River for commuters, commerce, and freight. And whereas a new bridge built to modern seismic standards will promote public safety by providing critical access to Salem Hospital and other emergency services in the event of an earthquake or community emergency, and will provide an alternate crossing when the existing bridges are closed during an emergency or other event, and
Please.
Whereas a new bridge crossing the Willamette River in Salem will reduce congestion on and near the bridges of Marion Street and Center Street and improve traffic circulation. And whereas a new bridge will support local and regional economic development, helping to attract and retain manufacturing and agricultural jobs in Marion and Polk counties by allowing businesses to efficiently ship their products to market. And whereas after a series of studies, the Salem River Crossing Oversight Team made a preliminary recommendation in August 2012 to move forward with alternative 4D for a third bridge over the Willamette River in Salem, as described in the April 2012 Draft Environmental Impact Study, the EIS, and
Whereas the City of Salem proposed refinements to the oversight team's alternative 4D to lessen the impacts to local neighborhoods and businesses, calling these refinements the Salem Alternative, and submitted the Salem Alternative to the oversight team on October 13, 2013. Whereas the oversight team requested that project staff review this alternative and compare it to others analyzed in the draft EIS, and whereas after staff review, the oversight team developed policy statements it wanted added to the Salem Alternative on October 31st, 2013, whereas the oversight team requested that each member take the Salem Alternative back to their respective locations to obtain direction with the intent to vote on the matter in February 2014, and whereas the Marion County Board of Commissioners supports the Salem Alternative, along with the oversight team's policy statements as documented in the November 18th, 2013 draft Salem Alternative description and oversight team policy statements, with the added direction that the process remain very public and open, and that as further refinements become available, the public has an ongoing opportunity to review and comment. Now, therefore, it is hereby resolved that the Marion County Board of Commissioners supports the Salem River crossing the Salem Alternative attached hereto, and by this reference incorporated herein. So a little bit long, but it is a good description exactly where we are. Any last comments? All right, thank you all again for all your involvement, and I assume all of you will continue working on this. All right, that is the end of our action items, and there are no public hearings this morning. The last thing to do then is to read those places we'll be together in the next week. We start this afternoon, 3:30 to 5, Economic Development Advisory Board at GK Machine in Donald from 3:30 to 5. And then tomorrow, Thursday, 8 o'clock to 9, City of Salem, Marion County meeting at the, I can't probably say that,
Alcione, right?
Alcione Cafe, Pringle Plaza, 315 High Street in Salem. Friday, Community Leaders Building in Oregon State Capitol, 900 Court Street Northeast, room H470. That's from 8 to 9. Monday's a holiday, Martin Luther King Day. Tuesday, we get back at it with a work session, Public Works Planning, Substantial Improvement, and Substantial Damage. I'm not quite sure what that means, but we'll find out. That'll be in the Columbia and Santiam Conference Rooms, 451 Division Street in Salem. And then next Wednesday at 9 o'clock, our regular weekly board session. All right. Anything else this morning?
Nope.
You're all cured from the flu and feel good about it?
Getting better.
I'd like you to start taking responsibility with that and call this meeting adjourned.